As Rabbi Ehrlich mentioned, today is the Shabbat before Passover and therefore bears a special name, Shabbat Hagadol, meaning the great or big Shabbat. As is typically Jewish, there are many reasons for why. But I'm going to share one with you. Some people say this Shabbat got its name because on this Shabbat, the rabbi gave the longest sermon of the year. The idea was that it was up to the rabbi to make sure that all the people who came to services on the Shabbat before Passover knew all the rules of keeping Passover. And as Daniel was explaining, in the Torah, there's a lot of rules. And when it comes to Passover, there are a lot of rules. Well, you might be relieved to know that I will not be following that tradition. First of all, Daniel already shared a beautiful Devar Torah. So instead of giving a very long sermon that reminds us of all the rules of Passover, I've decided to tell a short story that says something about the most essential meaning behind those rules. This story takes place at the turn of the century, when many of our grandparents, or many of our great-grandparents, or perhaps even many of our great-great-grandparents lived on the Lower East Side. This Lower East Side was very different from the one we know today. No fancy gyms, no boutique hotels, no hip restaurants. It did have Katz's Deli and economy candy, and the prices were a lot lower then than they are now. But still, it was a treat for people to buy a knish or even a penny candy. Most people in that community were poor, and the Jewish people among them worked long hours and scrimped and saved to make a chicken for Shabbat dinner or to give a few pieces of gelt, of money, to their children on Hanukkah. But on Passover, especially, they did the most they could with the little they had. Families would use their loveliest hand-embroidered tablecloths, dress in their best clothing, save up for months to eat meat and all the other dishes that made up a Seder feast. Passover wasn't just a holiday that cost a lot of money. It was also a lot of hard work, and not just because of all the cooking and the cleaning. You see, most Jews in the Lower East Side then, like some Jews now, changed their dishes for Passover. That second set of kosher for Passover dishes cost money, took up space, and required a lot of effort. All of the plates and the bowls and the serving pieces that they had used during the year had to be all packed up, and then they had to unpack the plates and the bowls and the serving pieces that they would use for the 8 days of the holiday. Even more challenging, families had to be creative about how to store them in their tenements, tiny apartments with lots of people. But they managed because it was so important to have kosher dishes for Passover. It was a source of pride. It meant that you had saved enough money for another set of dishes. And it was evidence that you wanted to spend that money for that purpose. It showed that you cared about Judaism and you cared about God. Well, this is a story about two families, the Yanklowitzes and the Schwartzmans, neighbors whose tenements shared a back stoop. Every year, about a week before Passover, Mr. Yanklowitz would say, "Yetta, it's time to pull out the Passover dishes." And Yetta would always say, "Fine, Yitz, you do it. You know where they are. We don't have room for them here, so we store them at the Schwartzmans." And Yitz would say, I would, but my back is aching like it's never ached before. Do you think you could do it? And Yetta would frown and grumble and stomp off and make her way to their neighbors, the Schwartzmans. Every year, about a week before Passover, Mr. Schwartzman would say, Shana, it's time to pull out the Passover dishes. And Shana would always say, fine, Schimmel, go do it. You know where they are. We don't have room for them here. So we store them at the Yanklowitzes. And Schimmel would say, I would, but my head is aching. It's aching like it's never ached this way before. Do you think you could do it? And Shana would frown and grumble and stomp off and make her way to their neighbors, the Yanklowitzes. Every year, a week before Passover, Yetta Yanklowitz and Shana Schwartzman would box up their ordinary, everyday dishware, all the plates and bowls and serving pieces that they used throughout the year, and then they would meet with their boxes behind the tenements on a small stoop. They sat, drank a few sips of Manischewitz wine, noshed on the last chametz crackers and cookies in their homes. They schmoozed and relaxed because neither had to climb up high to reach boxes of dishes on the top shelves of closets or crawl down low under beds. You see, years ago, to save money and space and effort, they decided to swap each other's ordinary dishes, pretending they were their own set of kosher for Passover dishes. Every Pesach, their husbands and children believed they were eating off of their very special, very beautiful holiday dishware. No one felt bad that they didn't have enough money or that they weren't precisely following the holiday rules. And every year, the two women smiled to themselves because they shared a secret no one else knew. Or so they thought. Someone else did know. What Yetta Yanklowitz and Shana Schwartzman didn't know was that the rabbi was watching them from the small window in the back of the shul. Every year, he would take a few sips of Manischewitz wine and nosh on some last remaining chametz crackers and cookies, watching how these women, with a little pretending, made sure their husbands felt proud and their children were happy, while they could conserve a little energy, save a little money, and share a secret bond of friendship. The rabbi took joy in how that brought them joy, and he smiled to himself because he knew a secret no one else did, or almost no one else. What the rabbi didn't know for sure, but certainly believed, was that God was watching too, and smiling, because in the end, what is far more important than all the individual rules are the values the rules hope to teach. Making the most you can with the little that you have, creating and sharing joy, finding time for relaxation and celebrating friendship and family, especially on Passover.